These are 10 times Meg deserved to go to jail. Starting with number 10, when Meg steals from the sick and dying in The Heartbreak Dog. Meg's class is assigned to complete their community service requirements by signing up for volunteer work. But because she's asking too many questions and, well, because she's Meg, the principal delegates her to work in a nursing home. Day 1 on the job sees Meg visiting a woman named Mrs. Parker's, and after only meeting with her for a few seconds, Meg already wants a new one. Mrs. Parker seems sweet enough, she just maybe isn't all there.
And between you and me, I hate my new student volunteer.
Meg spends her time at the care home doing glamorous things like filing toenails and getting yelled at. Kinda hard to tell the difference between the care home and the Griffin home based on that. When Mrs. Parker's demands her itch cream, Meg goes to find it in her drawer only to come across a beautiful gold brooch. Acting swiftly, Meg pockets the jewelry without the old lady noticing. Meg's pretty shocked she did something like that, but then remembers who she's stuck working for and quickly loses any guilt she's holding. She even sends a picture to her best friend.
Sick brooch!
So we're just gonna brush over a 70-something-year-old man being best friends with a teenager? Sure, totally normal and appropriate behavior. Over time, Meg racks up a treasure trove of vintage trinkets, which Chris soon discovers. Meg doesn't even try to beat around the bush, openly admitting to stealing from the folks at the retirement home because of how badly they treat her. Surprisingly, Chris wants in, and the pair form the ultimate brother-sister crime duo. Meg brings Chris to a residence she hasn't stolen from yet. Not one for subtlety, Chris dresses as an angel and convinces the tenant that she died and he's taking her to heaven, which is just the closet. Oh, so that's why they call it 7 Minutes in Heaven. The siblings work together to ransack the joint and take as much stuff as they can. Back at home, Meg and Chris sit surrounded by their treasure hoard, now stuffed to the brim with antiques. It's not until Chris realizes he's been emptying his pipe, giggity, into an urn that it dawns on them that they may have made a terrible mistake. Despite their love of the antiquities and their kleptomania, both siblings realize they need to give it all back. When night falls, Meg and Chris sneakily wheel their stash back into the retirement home, hoping to put this whole mess behind them. But before they can disappear into the night, the duo are caught by all the elderly residents they stole from. Meg apologizes and hopes they can let bygones be bygones, but Mrs. Parker's wants to call the police. This terrifies Meg, so Mrs. Parker's entertains a different idea, forcing Meg to spend time with them every day after school.
You monster.
Beggars can't be choosers, I suppose. Stealing is one thing, but stealing from people who are old and don't have much time left? Really, Meg? Sure, nobody got hurt, but Meg could have easily wound up in jail for this one. Number 9 sees a dark turn in Meg's crimes when she turns into a religious fanatic and ruins Brian's life in Not All Dogs Go to Heaven. While visiting a local Star Trek convention, Peter forces Meg to take a picture with a man he assumes is wearing a costume. Only it turns out he actually has the mumps, a very serious and contagious viral disease. Maybe it's not too contagious?
Well, I'd caution you that getting the mumps as an adult could result in serious complications.
Oh, that's unfortunate. So Meg is left bedridden, but thankfully her parents wheel in a TV to keep her occupied. Unfortunately, it only gets one channel, a heavily religious channel featuring the likes of Kirk Cameron. If you don't know who that is, then you're right there with most of the world. Although Meg is dismissive about being preached to, she starts to be drawn to Kirk's words when they remind her how sad her life is.
Meg, your mother made soup for you. Here you go, honey.
Meg eventually recovers, having found a new lease on life and a newfound appreciation for God and Christianity. Although Meg is adamant about sharing her new beliefs, her family isn't super receptive, especially Brian. At least the opportunity to lead prayer gets Peter excited.
Dear Lord, please give me the cheat codes for Mike Tyson's Punch-Out.
Meg continues to force her beliefs on her family, disrupting their TV time and asking probing questions, one of which is directed toward Brian, asking if he'll open his heart to God.
I'm an atheist.
What's that?
Brian seemed to be under the assumption that the family knew, but their shocked reactions tell a different story. They can excuse bashing religion, but they draw the line at believing in God, I suppose. Hoping to turn Brian's beliefs around, Meg offers him a peace offering with a wooden cross. Brian declines the offer, but we all know a dog can't refuse a good stick. Good luck getting that back from him, though. Brian grows tired of Meg's attempts to convert him, remaining steadfast in his belief, or rather disbelief, in a higher power. This doesn't seem good enough for Meg, who then proceeds to slander Brian's name on the news by outing him to the entire town. Life seems to be upended for Brian, who now has to narrowly avoid angry detractors just to get home. He confesses that no business will serve him, blaming Meg for the shift in public perception. Without being able to obtain any of his vices, Brian is reduced to a shaking wreck, even imagining talking liquor bottles. Seemingly ready for change, Brian gleefully tells Meg he's seen the light and believes in God. Meg is obviously ecstatic to hear this, and Brian hopes he can start spreading the word about his change in faith. Meg agrees, as long as Brian is ready to do the Lord's work. After making a much-needed liquor store run, we finally get to see what the Lord's work actually is. Turns out, it's a book burning. An angry mob angrily burns many science books that go against their dogma, which Brian refuses to take part in. Meg refuses to be swayed, which causes Brian to ask some probing questions of his own, like how a just God could give Meg the terrible life she has. This snaps Meg out of it, it, realizing she gravitated towards religion to find reason in her crazy life. While becoming religious isn't exactly illegal, inciting riots towards an individual and slandering their good name certainly is. Not to be a stickler for the rules, but I bet you they didn't even have a permit for that book burning. That alone is probably worth a hefty fine, if not jail time. I sounded like a nerd, didn't I? Hardboiled Meg is at the number 8 spot, an episode in which Meg goes from having a crush to becoming a getaway driver. While hanging out at a bowling alley, Meg tries to hustle anyone willing to play her in a game of pool. Having nothing better to do, Meg seems content with wasting time needing mustard packets until a young rebel without a cause looking young man named Seymour requests a ride from her. Meg is obviously struck with love at first sight for the 100th time, and the two share a sensual pool lesson together. Later in the evening, Meg finally gives Seymour that ride home, inquiring about where he's from and snacking on another mustard packet. Seriously, what's her deal with those things? Seymour asks her to pull over at a 7-Eleven, which Meg is all for until she sees him pull out a gun. Meg debates backing out and driving away, but something deep inside keeps her parked. I mean, I get it. Have you seen his biceps? Meg nervously waits in the car until alarms start ringing and Seymour bursts from the station with a fat bag of cash. Without a second thought, Meg peels out of the parking lot, but the fuzz are in hot pursuit. Going pedal to the floor, Meg aggressively weaves in and out of traffic to try and shake the officer on her tail. The thrill of the chase seems to give her a sick satisfaction, pulling off some maneuvers that would make even Dom Toretto blush. Around her family, Meg tries to play coy about her newfound double life, but she can't really hide the rush she feels. Meg and Seymour go on a certified crime spree, robbing convenience stores and seemingly falling in love in the process. After robbing a Circle K, Meg and Seymour enter into another 5-star wanted level chase, seemingly bringing the entire precinct into the mix. Not sure why they don't just run the license plate, but who am I to question the law? Their escape brings them to a railroad with an incoming train. Seymour professes that they won't be able to make it, but Meg pulls a true Grand Theft Auto maneuver and jumps the train off the bed of a truck. What a rush. Chris sees Meg pull into the driveway with her mysterious friend, who discusses a huge job he wants Meg's help with, robbing Ross Dress for Less's Memorial Day sale. Try not to faint at the thought of such an evil crime. The two share a truly disgusting kiss while Chris ponders what to do about his sister becoming a criminal. Worried for her safety, Chris tries to talk her out of going through with it, but Meg is firm in her and Seymour's plan and storms out. Meg has the whole thing ironed out, planning to use an air duct in the... Oh, Seymour's just gonna use his gun again. Makes sense. Seymour makes it out with the goods, and like clockwork, the chase is on once again. Meg's tight turn manages to take out some of the pursuing police, but more and more seem to come out of nowhere. With countless cops right behind them, Meg floors it up an opening bridge, only to turn at the last second to let the police dump themselves over the edge. Is anyone else sweating after that? Just me? Parking underneath an overpass, Meg asks Seymour if he's just using her. Seymour denies this, professing Meg to be the most kick-ass and amazing person he's ever met. He then divulges his love to her in the most romantic way possible, through song.
Suddenly Seymour.
Oh, dang. Meg zooms off in a panic, only to crash headfirst into Peter, who was doing what? Oh, killing Quagmire. Cool. Chris pulls Meg from the wreck, willing to take the fall for her crimes out of love. When Meg asks about Seymour, she's shocked to find out he never existed. In fact, none of this episode actually happened. It was all just a delusion in Meg's mind.
Have you ever had a dream that
Meg gets away, but not without racking up an impressive rap sheet. Then again, most of it was all in her head, so who's to say if any of her crimes are real? Is this video even real? Am I real? Let's just move on. At number 7, we have the time that Meg had Stewie taken away by CPS in an episode titled Love Thy Trophy. While at school, Meg is made fun of for her big, bulky purse. She can't even find comfort in her teacher.
Bye.
Meg really wants a Prada bag, but they are far too expensive. To get herself some money, Meg decides to become a waitress at a diner. She originally gets turned away for having no experience, but quickly gets the job when the owner mistakes Stewie for Meg's baby. Rather than correct him, Meg decides to play along.
Stewie. My son's name is Stewie.
The lies continue to pile on when Meg makes sure to let people know she's a single teenage mother to earn bigger tips. She gets more money and Stewie gets free pancakes. Seems like a win-win to me. Meg starts to fully crank up the charade when she starts telling everyone Stewie is addicted to crack.
I love crack. I'm absolutely cuckoo for crack.
This perks up the ears of a social worker who arranges to have Stewie taken from the Griffins and placed into a foster home. Unaware of what happened, Meg returns home to flaunt her brand new Prada bag. When her parents inquire how she made so much money, she admits to using Stewie to earn sympathy points from customers. With the assistance of their neighbors and friends, the Griffins attempt to sneak Stewie out of their foster home but inadvertently start a toddler prison riot. Defeated, the Griffins go to devise a new plan, yet when the foster mom notices Meg's Prada bag, they decide to trade. Good to know a baby's worth about $1,100. You could definitely consider what Meg did as child endangerment. I mean, a diet of nothing but pancakes is all fun and games until someone develops diabetes. Coming in at number 6 is proof that Stewie isn't the only sibling Meg is willing to endanger in Chris Cross. Kicking things off at school, we see Chris being made fun of for his non-name brand Latvia imported shoes.
What are
Chris goes to his parents to ask for new, cooler sneakers, but Lois explains that money is tight and it's just not possible. Not willing to let this be the end of it, Chris takes matters into his own hands by begrudgingly taking cash out of his mom's purse. But who's that sneakily spying on him? Why, if it isn't the subject of today's video. Meg drills into him about this the next day, and Chris begs Meg not to tell on him. Seeing her opportunity, Meg agrees to not tell their parents if Chris agrees to do whatever she says.
Meg, this is how a lot of porn starts.
I mean it, Chris.
Chris is reluctant, but he agrees to preserve his good name. Knowing that he would, Meg provides Chris with a list of everything she wants him to do.
Okay, Meg, I've cleaned your room and I did your homework. Can I be done now?
He wishes. Meg has plenty of things for Chris to do, like reading a pre-scripted line for her while they watch An Officer and a Gentleman.
That's gonna be you someday, Meg.
I know it will.
Next, Meg asks Chris to help her put her contacts in, but she scares the absolute crap out of him with a pretty gross Undertaker impression. Not content to let Chris rest, she forces him to stand outside a Planned Parenthood and photograph every girl in Meg's grade that goes in. Meg tries to convince him to call them and pretend to be their dead baby. Brutal. But Chris refuses. Meg tries to scare him with threats of telling the parents, but Chris is far too gone to care about that anymore. Without thinking, Chris decides to run away from home. Despite Meg saying he has nowhere to go, Chris finds solace in, oh god, not him. Literally anybody but him. The next morning, Peter and Lois ask about Chris's whereabouts. Meg plays coy and says he just left early, but Lois knows Chris isn't one to miss breakfast. Luckily, Chris is safe and sound at Herbert's, even if it seems like the old man took on more than he expected by letting his crush live with him. Better to try it now before you're married, right? Racked with guilt, Meg starts to look around for Chris. She doesn't find him at the mini-mart, but she does find Mayor West and his, gas station hot dog? Back at Herbert's, he and Chris get into what seems like one of many arguments, which convinces Herbert that it's time to ask Chris to leave. And how convenient, Meg is right outside. Meg, finally seeing the error of her ways, apologizes to Chris for making him her whipping boy and asks him to come home. Chris realizes that both of them rely on each other as a support system, and these siblings need to stick together. A wholesome, happy ending. But the act of blackmail is considered illegal under federal and state law. Certainly not the worst thing Meg has done, but driving Chris out of the house could have led to something much, much worse. Speaking of worse, the number 5 spot goes to Friends Without Benefits, seeing as though Chris comes close to being scarred for life by Meg. Meg becomes enamored with a new boy at school named Kent, but fears she doesn't have a shot with him. Not that that doesn't stop her mind from dreaming up some out-of-this-world daydreams. Meanwhile, back home, Brian and Stewie read through Meg's diary, finding out she has written a lot about this Kent guy.
Jeez, it's just pages and pages of stuff about this Kent guy.
While walking home from school, Meg lets another daydream get the better of her, almost getting hit by a car. Luckily, that tree was Mayor West's destination. Realizing how much of a grip Kent has on her, Meg decides she needs to just rip off the band-aid and ask him out. Meg fiddles with her phone at home, unsure whether or not to give Kent a call. Lois reassures her that it's okay for a girl to ask out a guy.
It's all so sad and desperate, and I would never do it.
Don't think she needed that last bit, Lois, but thanks. She finally works up the courage to call him, and surprisingly, he says yes to a hangout. I think she's pretty happy about it. The pair go to the movies, but Meg just can't make the move she wants to on Kent. After a nice night together, Kent drops Meg off at home. Meg tries to cap off the night with a kiss, which Kent doesn't reciprocate. Meg is super embarrassed, and Kent reaffirms that he really likes hanging out with her. There's just one problem.
I'm gay.
That's all well and good, but then Kent reveals he does have a crush on a member of the Griffin family.
I like Chris.
What?
Heartbroken, Meg spends the rest of the night crying in the kitchen. Brian tries not to get involved, but that never works out well for him, does it? Meg doesn't understand how Kent could be gay after knowing him for years, but Brian asserts that he may have only realized this recently. Unwilling to let this stop her, Meg defiantly schemes to make Kent realize he's straight. Not very progressive of you, Meg. Back at school, Kent sits with Chris at lunch to get to know him better. He asks to hang out, and Chris agrees. Meg interrupts and tries to convince Kent he isn't actually gay, but Kent doubles down. If she's anything, she's certainly persistent. The two continue to hang out, but Meg keeps trying to seduce Kent by showing him a picture of her hairy back and aggressively coming on to him. Weirded out by how Meg is acting, Kent professes that not only can they not be boyfriend and girlfriend, but he doesn't think they can be friends at all now. Keep digging this hole, Meg. Meg's friends try to convince her to move on, but her obsession has grown so strong that she's unable to eat or sleep because he's all she thinks about. All she wants is to experience one night of romance with Kent to give her some closure. Yeah, I'm sure that's how obsession works. Meg's friend, who I'm just gonna call friend number 2, jokingly says that if Chris and Kent hook up, Chris can just describe it to Meg. An insane thought to us, but a perfectly reasonable one to someone like Meg. Upon returning home, Meg puts her plan into action. She asks Chris to redeem a 1 free hug coupon he gave her on her birthday, only she doesn't want this to be just any ordinary hug. She wants it to be a butt hug with Kent. Chris is obviously against the idea because if there's one thing you can't tell a hormonal teenage boy, it's to do something not heteronormative. Oh, and pay no mind to the window. We're only showcasing showcasing horrendous stuff here. No means no for Chris, but it sounds like Meg's definition of no might mean something much different and much more illegal. Meg goes next door to Quagmire's to inquire about some roofies, which Quagmire is oddly too keen to hand out. But knowing Quagmire, he's probably the house you tell your kids to avoid on Halloween. At school the next day, Meg approaches Kent and lies to him that Chris is interested in hooking up with him. Kent is excited, stating that he didn't know Chris was gay. To keep up the lie, Meg states that Chris isn't as comfortable in his sexuality as Kent, so he'll need to experience this while he's asleep. So many red flags, you'd think you were at a shipyard. Later that night, Meg offers up a pitcher of spiked Kool-Aid to Chris, seemingly guaranteeing her plan goes off without a hitch. Yet when she comes up to her room, she finds Chris putting something in her bedside drawer. It turns out to be a picture of them in the car when they were young. Meg remembers this being a terrible trip, but Chris professes how important the memory is to him. An example of the loving bond between a brother and sister. But the wholesome kind, not the uncomfortable kind. Having a change of heart, Meg pours out the spiked drink and everything seems right. That is until Kent climbs into Chris's room later that evening. He wasn't expecting Chris to be awake, but he's more than willing to follow through if Chris is game. Chris obviously isn't game, as he's told us multiple times this episode, so he calls Meg in to explain what's going on. A deeply apologetic Meg spills her entire plan, from her obsession to her intention of drugging Chris. Both boys are, rightly so, furious. Kent storms past a seductive Stewie and out the front door. That should be it, but Meg has apparently left out the bag of roofies from earlier, and thinking they're candy, Stewie eats one. Meg is sad she ruined her chances with Kent, which, as we've discussed, were non-existent in the first place. Brian says she's not a bad person, she just did a bad thing. I don't know, Brian. Intentionally trying to drug your own brother so you can unwillingly live out your fantasies makes you a pretty terrible person in my book. The Hand That Rocks the Wheelchair is the episode at the number 4 spot, and brace yourselves because Meg's about to steal Bonnie's life and become Joe's new baby mama. So the episode starts with Bonnie asking Lois to check in on Joe and her daughter Susie while she visits her father in the hospital. Lois agrees but pushes the duty onto Meg, and in typical teenage fashion, Meg doesn't want to lend a hand. But all it takes is some less than truthful coaxing from Lois to convince Meg to take the job.
And Bonnie said you were very pretty.
But how did that come up?
So when Meg first arrives, she walks in on Joe practicing a few different cop entrances on a doll. Our brave boys in blue, ladies and gentlemen. Joe asks if Meg has any experience tending to handicapped people, but the best Meg's done is take care of an older lady down the street. Well, it was supposed to be Meg, but you know this show won't give her airtime unless it's completely necessary.
I must have just slept on it wrong.
I stole Meg's cutaway.
Wow, you really can't let her have anything, can you, Peter? Rough. Things start off well as Meg helps Joe with his leg stretches. Seems counterintuitive, but okay. Yet, enveloped in her good deed, she misses the bus to school. But thankfully, Joe's here to lend a hand. He offers to drive her to school, and the two share what must be the most awkward car journey as the cop tries to relate to a teenage girl through Nicolas Cage and Lady Gaga. Every teenage girl's main interests.
Is Lady Gaga a douche?
I don't think so.
Well, whatever it is, I like it.
When the topic of conversation turns to Joe's paraplegia, Meg finds that he manages to keep a pretty upbeat look on life by making the best of the situation.
When life ruins your legs, you just gotta make lemonade.
That actually makes me feel better about the puns I make on this channel. Meg finds herself connecting with Joe as she equates his physical struggles to her social struggles. I don't really think those two are comparable, but hey, at least she's showing some kind of empathy. Meg all but loses it when Joe drops her off at the front door, showing that he doesn't mind being seen with her, unlike everyone else. When some punk kid jokingly asks if that was her boyfriend, Meg seems kinda fond of that notion. Maybe a little too fond.
Yeah, that's my boyfriend.
Things start to get a little weird when Meg comes over early to cook breakfast while in what she calls a sexy outfit for Susie.
This is Patrick Stewart. How are you liking the program so far?
Well, I was enjoying it before seeing this. Meg's behavior continues to get weirder as she dresses up in Bonnie's clothes and intercepts a call from Bonnie who tells her she'll be home tomorrow. Judging by the look on Meg's face, that's not gonna fly. As it turns out, neither will Bonnie as Meg drives all the way to Maine to sneak a gun into Bonnie's luggage so she gets arrested by the TSA. The train goes even further off the rail when, during a nice dinner out, Meg lets it slip that she wants to have a baby with Joe. We're not even at the worst part. When Susie starts crying, Meg breastfeeds her. I have no words. Patrick Stewart, what do you have to say?
This feels right, but it tastes like a dirty penny.
Joe tries to talk to Peter and Lois, but they dismiss his worries. Thankfully, Lois clues in and tries to talk some sense into Meg, citing that these aren't mutual feelings and that they have nothing in common. Surely Meg will understand and start to— oh my god, she threw herself in front of Joe's car!
We're exactly alike, you and I. Now we can be together.
Thankfully, this finally makes Meg realize she was in the wrong as she apologizes to both Joe and Bonnie. Even still, planting a weapon in someone's bag? Breastfeeding another person's baby? Intentionally throwing yourself in front of a car? Surely that's enough to earn a person some jail time. For number 3, let's talk about that one time Meg actually went to jail and became a hardened convict in Dial Meg for Murder. Although the first chunk of the episode follows Peter trying and failing to become a rodeo star, the real story starts when Brian gets a writing gig writing for Teen People magazine. Tasked with writing about the average teenage girl, he decides to choose Meg as his subject. This leads to him and Stewie sneakily following Meg around to observe her. Remember guys, it's not creepy if it's research. The pair discover that Meg has a pen pal inside an adult correctional facility named Luke, but it seems like they do a lot more than write to each other, if you catch my drift. Brian tells the rest of the family, who understandably forbid her from seeing her prison fling. But not even prison walls can stop the power of love as her jailbird boyfriend sneaks out during a prison riot to visit her. The two are found out by Brian, and once Peter deduces what is going on through the Power of TV guide, Joe is called to chase Luke down. After making the crucial mistake of running away from a guy on wheels going downhill, Luke is arrested. But the justice doesn't stop there, as Joe also places Meg under arrest for harboring a fugitive. 3 months pass and Meg is released from prison. Gone is the dorky teen girl the family once knew. In her place is a hardened convict. She immediately marks her territory by taking down the top dog of the family, aka Peter, with a brutal beatdown capped off with a curb stomp. Hope the Griffins have good dental insurance. The prison antics continue as Meg treats the bathroom as a communal shower and opts to go number 2 in a bucket in her room. Lois tries to control her, but Meg is just going to keep wiping with Lois's shirts instead. A very gross but respectable power move. Things aren't much better at school, as after she's insulted by some of her school bullies, she bludgeons the whole table with a bag filled with soda cans. Hard to blame her, some of those jokes were pretty weak.
What'd you do, carve a gun out of soap and then not wash with it? Haha, you.
Meg's grip on the family is so tight that they dare not say anything bad about her to her face. Luckily for them, she plans to move out by the end of the week. It sounds like great news, but it's immediately tarnished when Meg coerces Peter into punching Stewie.
You fatso, punch your baby in the face.
But to leave Quahog, Meg needs money. Her answer to this is to force Brian at gunpoint to drive her to Mort's pharmacy to rob the place. Before anything bad can happen, Brian manages to get through to her with the article he wrote about her, showing that she is loved and cared for despite Meg thinking the opposite. With some sense finally talked into her, Meg returns home and everything is back to normal. Hey, where did those tattoos go? Tattoo removal is not cheap. In one episode, Meg racks up harboring a fugitive, assault, kidnapping, and attempted robbery. Some guys wish they had a rap sheet as long as Meg's. Number 2 has Meg reaching the point of no return as her obsession with Brian goes to the extreme and barely legal. Meg comes home crying about not having a date to take to the junior prom. Even her backup guy rejected her by killing his own brother to get out of going with her. Yikes. Inconsolable and threatening to hurt herself, Meg garners enough sympathy from Brian to where he offers to take her to the dance. Meg is on cloud 9 for the night, but Brian just wants to get through it, numbing himself with some booze. As the night goes on, Brian continues to get more and more drunk, and Meg starts to get the feeling that he really doesn't want to be there. Yet when Meg starts getting picked on by her bully Connie, Brian absolutely roasts the girl and sends her off crying.
But now you can't stand to look at yourself in the mirror because all you see is a whore.
Never having had someone stand up for her like that, Meg earnestly thanks Brian and the two share a hug. And a little more than a hug. Kind of weird considering the two are practically family, but at least Brian has the right reaction. The next morning, an overly affectionate Meg tries to get Brian to hang out with her, but he barely manages to squeeze out of that one. Even still, Meg texts Brian a cute little message seconds later. If you think things are weird now, then buckle up. Stewie gleefully gets Brian to admit to the kiss, while Brian assures him that it meant nothing. Later in the day, Meg pops the boyfriend-girlfriend question to Brian, who quickly tries to shut it down. Despite numerous lies to avoid Meg, Brian is forced to hang out with her just to keep Lois from finding out about the kiss. While at the mall, Meg introduces Brian to her friends, who seem all too caught up in what happened at the dance. When Meg starts calling Brian her boyfriend, he finally sits her down and makes it clear that it's just not happening between the two of them. Meg says she understands, but those little voices in her head say otherwise. Kids, never let those intrusive thoughts win. A few days later, Meg gives Brian a peace offering in the shape of a pie. It's a good looking pie. It has apples, cinnamon, and oh yeah, Meg's hair.
What?
Still, this isn't as disturbing to Brian as Stewie's pronunciation of Cool Whip is.
Cool Whip. Cool Whip.
Brian goes to Lois because he thinks they may have a problem with Meg. What? A problem with Meg? No, this is how all teenage girls act, right? Brian eventually fesses up to the kiss, and Lois's reaction is more than understandable. Going upstairs to talk some sense into Meg, Brian stumbles across a very creepy shrine to himself in her room. With the help of the headmaster of the New York School for the Hard of Hearing, Brian lays it out plain as day that Meg and he are not in a relationship.
We're not boyfriend and girlfriend!
Not content with taking no for an answer, Meg knocks Brian out and takes him to a hotel for a nice romantic night of being tied to a chair. Before anything messed up can happen, Peter and the newly deputized officers kick down the door. Meg still refuses to give up on winning over Brian, so Quagmire of all people offers to give her what she needs, which turns out to be an earnest and compassionate heart-to-heart, which finally gets Meg to listen to reason. You can add aggravated assault and kidnapping to Meg's list of crimes. We're just lucky the police showed up before anything truly disturbing could happen. And we finally made it to the #1 position, the worst of the worst, murder of the most brutal kind in a fistful of Meg. Meg's degeneracy starts early when visiting her locker, where she finds a baby lovingly addressing her as mama. Like any good mother, she hits it with a book and locks it away. Wow, this has to be a new record for the fastest crime committed by Meg in an episode. Never mind that, because Meg's friends come over to gossip about a new kid named Michael Pulaski, who's already earning himself an infamous reputation.
I heard he knifed a kid on the playground, then beat up the knife.
Speak his name and he appears. Michael bulldozes his way into school with everything ripped from his jeans to his muscles. A naive Neil Goldman explains, the best way to disarm a bully is to befriend them. Feel free to pause the video now and take a wild guess at how that goes. Once lunch rolls around, Meg haphazardly runs into Michael, spilling spaghetti everywhere. Italians, look away!
Oh, fudge.
Well, you know the rules. This requires a schoolyard fight scheduled for Friday. Luckily, it seems like Meg is taking it pretty well. On the bright side, at least Meg is finally getting the attention she's been looking for. She's obviously scared for her life, and her friends urge her to find any way she can out of this fight. Meg goes to Lois, hoping to convince her to let her transfer to a different school, but Lois tells her that they don't have the money for that. Her next attempt is something a little more drastic, getting expelled. She releases a sexually explicit video, but it fails to gain any traction. Only one view? I remember those days. When that fails, she decides to enlist hired muscle courtesy of 4 high school jocks. Yet, Michael's reputation precedes him, as the athletes aren't willing to go through with something like that for anything under $1,000. Before we find out if she can even gather the money, Meg finds the 4 boys beaten to a bloody, mangled pulp with an ominous message written in blood above them. Meg breaks down in tears as her imminent demise draws closer and closer. Not even her friends are willing to stand by her side anymore, fearing being targeted by association. But not all hope is lost, as Meg stumbles across a surprisingly well-decorated Quagmire in his office, aka a stall in the girls' room. Quagmire is willing to lend a hand, telling Meg to come over to his place first thing the next morning. The next day, Quagmire explains why he wants to help. He too was bullied when he was a child, and the lasting memory has haunted him to this day. Luckily, Quagmire is very familiar with the human body, and he's willing to share his knowledge with Meg to help overcome her bully. To train Meg, Quagmire suggests wearing a crude Peter mask to elicit the appropriate rage out of her. But when Joe confuses him for the actual Peter, things get a little sidetracked.
All right, Peter? You seem a little quiet today.
I'm fine.
Getting back on track, Quagmire suggests that she use her body as a weapon. Not a finely tuned weapon though, more like a gross and unappealing one. But now it's time to train. And there's no better way to train than through an homage to 1984's Punch-Out! The day the fight finally arrives, with the whole school looking to get in on the action. A noticeably scared Meg stands across from Michael, a crowd of their peers cheering them on. Probably cheering for the guy that's gonna kill her, but cheering nonetheless. Michael lands the first punch, the second punch, and the third. Really, all of the punches, actually. Meg gets punched from pretty to ugly multiple times as Michael begins to go in for the kill. But before she's down and out, she remembers what Quagmire taught her.
Use the gross.
Springing back to life, Meg lands a sloppy kiss on Michael, which throws the towering bully off. Meg follows up with a popped pimple attack that makes Michael vomit. And me. Looking to end this, Michael goes for a final blow, but Meg lifts her shirt up. The resulting image causes Michael to melt in a scene straight out of Indiana Jones. With her bully defeated, the entire school cheers for their new hero, who, according to a voiceover, dies 1 year later from hot dog-related septic shock. Don't worry, I don't think that's canon. But what is canon is that Meg is a confirmed murderer. Sure, it was in self-defense, unlike many of the other crimes she committed, but she did completely melt that guy, which is pretty brutal and may be seen as unjust in a court of law. But I'm not a lawyer, so don't take my word for it. But what you should take my word for is why it would be a great idea to subscribe to the channel. I just posted a new video that you can click on screen now, so come join me there. Bye!